This is the Other 23 Hours podcast. We're here to bring awareness to and reduce the stigma of addiction through an open dialogue about recovery. Join us this week and every week for new episodes and content.
For this piece, Andrew had an idea. You want to talk about your idea?
I did. Do
it again into
So-
the mic.
No, I'm saying I had an idea.
Oh.
I did that thing. So, I was at a meeting yesterday, and this guy talked about how difficult things were for him because he's been, on and off having some issues over the past few weeks. By few weeks, I mean like 6 weeks. So,
That's not a long time, though. I mean, as far as,
well, it's not like a recent,
you can have
this
issues
is not
over
a new thing. This is like a
3 to 6 months if you have Paul's, for instance. Well, up to a
sure.
year.
Well, the issues he's having is like going in and out. So.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
he's like early recovery if he's attempting
I don't know.
recovery.
Yeah, I suppose it depends on how you view it. He's done it before. So, technically freshly sober, question mark, but not necessarily new to recovery, not
Gotcha.
early recovery. I don't know. It depends on your definition of it, how you view it. Anyways, it got me thinking about, like, where I am now and how much work I put into keeping things where they are, and how much work I've put into getting here, and all the things that it has entailed, and like that I've heard other people talk about who have some recovery in their lives, how much work they've put into it, and what has gone into it for them. So,
What would you say is, how did you look at it when you first started versus now?
that is a good question. So I don't think that I really understood the scope of what I would have to do. And I definitely don't think that I was able to see the full benefits, because it's like one of those things, in your life, you can have a plan of how things are going to go, and then you actually start doing it, and then things rarely end up actually going exactly the way that you think that they will before you start doing something. It's with any skill or starting a job or, really doing any pursuit in life. So things change, and I don't think that anyone can tell a person who is still actively using, like, okay, these are all the great things that are going to happen to you. Like, you can give some general, your life is going to get better, but it's very difficult to give specific, this is how your life is going to get better exactly.
Right. Well, that's probably because, different work is involved for everyone to get to those different places.
Yeah. Well, not only that, but people have different goals too.
So then we were talking about how difficult it is to maintain this. Like, what do you think are some of the hard parts?
Well, I think early on, especially, there's a difficulty with making that conscious decision day to day to just do something different that's counter to what essentially becomes a different, quote unquote, natural state of being.
I just
for a
want to
lot of
say right
people.
here that the way you said that, I feel like that's applicable to everyone. Like, you get used to doing something, you get almost comfortable and or addicted to doing something a certain way or having a certain thing, or like you could become dependent on whatever, and then it becomes a daily conscious choice to move away from that thing or change whatever. Or, I mean, even just change your mindset about whatever's happening around you. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
like, that's something I find incredibly relatable.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, it's just a question of changing habitual patterns of behavior and then the accompanying kind of mindset and perspective. So, like this, there's a lot of negative self-talk that was going on with this individual, and that can be like literally just as detrimental as any outside, or even more detrimental than outside influences.
Did you have negative self-talk?
I think there was definitely a time that I did where I didn't. I'll tell you, definitely in the middle of it, I didn't think that I was really gonna be able to stop. I just kind of like, there was a point where I was just like, well, I guess this is just how things are gonna be, and this is just how my life is gonna look for forever, and that's really tough to get past. And really, unless oftentimes, I know for me, definitely there had to be some outside influences that gave me a sort of impetus or like reason to stop, or like want to stop.
Can you name what those are for you?
Sure. Well, I definitely had some legal repercussions happen. Though I definitely have had those, and that wasn't enough because I just kind of chalked it up to like, well, that was just bad luck, and I'll just be more careful next time, and I won't get caught with drugs, and I'll be fine. I'll just be able to keep doing this. I think for me, really, the biggest point of recovery to me, and the biggest draw of recovery for me, is building a life that I feel like I always wanted and knew could exist, but I just I didn't know what it looked like. I didn't know how to get it. So I think being able to start doing that with someone that I really cared about was absolutely crucial in not only showing me what it could be like and that it was possible, but kind of giving me the motivation to do it. So, that's like just my own personal journey, I guess. My own personal motivations and reasons that kind of helped get me to change the way that I saw things and change my behaviors. And we had this really good exercise at a SMART meeting that was talking about the link between habits and feelings. Mm-hmm. And, oftentimes there's this saying like, fake it till you make it. And for good reason, that feelings often follow action.
Mm-hmm.
So
I've heard this.
Yeah. So if you want to feel differently, then you have to act differently and do things differently to feel differently. So, you can't wait until you feel differently to do things differently, because that's putting the cart before the horse, in essence.
So that sounds really hard. How did you start to do that then? I mean, like, or what are some of the daily things that you do to like keep yourself going or create motivation, or like, overcome the difficulty that is inherent in this process?
Well, at this point for me, it's a little more autopilot, so it's not actually like a daily issue that I face. Mm-hmm. But I think early on there was definitely a lot of thought, like, I could do something short term and it wouldn't be a big deal. Just being altered for a few hours wasn't really going to make a big difference.
But how did you decide that it would ultimately be a big difference and that you didn't want to do it? Or was it not a decision? Because, I mean, we could talk about here, you have kind of these kind of backup measures going on medicationally, the Vivitrol and the Wellbutrin. And it definitely seems like that's helping to shape your recovery a little bit.
Yeah. I think that they're both really beneficial. So I think for me the Vivitrol really kind of keeps the cravings at bay, and so that's less of something that I have had to deal with over time. So that's helped me get to the point where I didn't have to deal with this on a daily basis, and like it gave me enough time to build up other supports and build up, other backup measures, and like really it gave me enough time to find things that I enjoy doing enough that it's not like it's. So I was talking to a friend of mine, a different friend of mine, the other day when I went to go see him at his house, and we were talking about how I made some offhand comment about how cravings, I still think about using occasionally, but they don't linger. Mm-hmm. They don't linger, and they're a lot easier to kind of dispel. So really just finding a way to get over that part of the brain that says this is going to fix all your problems, and just finding a way to kind of muscle through that until that chatter quiets down.
So you literally muscle more often now in the gym. Do you feel like that helps to, like, with this process at all? Or
I feel like it does. I don't really have a strong explanation for how or why it works for me. I do know that it helps me, I would say, mentally by wearing me out enough that I can sleep really well all the time. Mm-hmm. There is the added kind of struggle of almost constantly being sore somewhere, mm-hmm. and also almost constantly just being tired and hungry all the time.
And how does this help?
Well, so it gives me another point of focus, I guess.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I guess for me, it's the benefits of going to the gym and like the results that I'm going after are worth more than losing them by using. So the way that makes me feel and the long-term results are more beneficial and more important than the short-term benefits of like feeling good for a few hours or, shorter that would happen if I used be.
I'm really curious though, because you acknowledged from the meeting that it's very hard, and it sounds like right now you're not having a lot of difficulty with it, but I'm sure you can remember when you did. And like, it's really interesting to hear you talk now because I know there are going to be people out there who are like, well, that's just not how it is for me. Like, I think about these things all the time. Like, I can't get out of my head, or I can't stop wanting to use, or, so like where, like, that's the kind of difficulty we're talking about. Where we were saying there's no easy out. So do you think like you just kind of commit to the recovery process, and in that you just allow whatever that process needs to be to kind of like start to form? Because you had said earlier, for instance, also that it starts to look different once you do it. It looks different than what you think it's going to look like. So like, can you talk about that a little bit so that like people who are like, I don't know if I'll ever get it,
Yeah.
you know, like,
So yeah, so I didn't picture that my life would look like it does at this point in time. And when I say that, I mean that I didn't think that I would be able to simplify my life to the point that I have, I guess I would say.
mm-hmm.
So there's a few people in my life who were rather instrumental in kind of helping me along the way, especially in the beginning when I was having trouble more often. And I would say that having people around that I could talk to and just talk about what was going on inside of me and like what I was struggling with and how I felt and who could relate in that way was huge.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that opportunity was available before when I had previously been in, you know, in fellowships. It's just not really something that I ever took advantage of to the extent that I do now and that I did in the beginning too.
Mm-hmm.
So building those kind of close interpersonal friendships and relationships with people that I trust in the way that I have. So just sharing a lot of what I was going through was a big help to kind of help get over those feelings of like shit. 'Cause a lot of times I just felt like I was the only person who was having to deal with this and like had these thoughts and felt that like hopelessness, like shit, this is just going to be the rest of my life. And this is miserable. And, you know, I've tried to get sober and that's miserable. So why would I get sober just to be miserable if I can still get high and be miserable?
Yeah.
You know, what's the point? I'll just have to put all this extra work in for the same result and forget that. That doesn't make any sense. I'm not going to do that. So,
But is that actually how it is? I mean, like now looking back, is it just as miserable and you're putting in a lot of effort, or is it better?
no, absolutely. It's night and day. There's absolutely no, it would be more, no. So it's much better now than it ever was using.
What are some of the things that you really like about what's happening in your life right now that like makes you excited to just continue this journey?
It might sound funny, but I really appreciate the consistency of just feeling normal. There's no like monumentous ups and downs. There's no, I just, you know, I can wake up in the morning and be like, all right, I feel okay, or I don't feel okay, and like I'm tired, but I can fix that by drinking water and drinking coffee and making sure that I eat enough food. And then I can, you know, try to get some more sleep tonight. But there's easier workarounds than trying to figure out a way to come up with money to score, or, you know, if I can't do that, just having to call off work or just not being able to function at all.
Yeah.
So it's a lot easier to, you know, throw some food in my mouth than try to find a way to scam people or come up with money somehow to make it through the day, because it's such a short-term fix.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it feels monumental at the time. And you know, I guess in some ways it was.
Well, that's why people do it. I mean, if there wasn't some positive payoff at some point,
Right.
they probably wouldn't, you know.
Yeah, it's funny. So I had another friend of mine who also struggled with opiates, and he was like, you know, it didn't take me very long to figure out that I probably shouldn't do heroin because it's really messing my life up. But that didn't stop me.
Yeah.
People do these things because they feel good and they provide relief in some form or fashion. So, getting away from feeling emotions or dealing with trauma or pain or whatever kind of struggles that might be going on internally with people, it's tough stuff to face. And I think a lot of the hard work that I was talking about entails dealing with the stuff that I know for me personally, I spent a lot of time using drugs to mask because I didn't want to deal with it. And then, I stopped using and I was like, well, all right, come to find out they're still there. They didn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
And I still have to deal with them. But, putting the work in to deal with them and work through the issues that I had, and, I'm still doing that work now. Mm-hmm. But it gets to the core of why I was using in the first place. And so dealing with the things that made me want to use also alleviates a lot of that wanting to use.
Yeah.
Because the whole reasoning behind wanting to use in the first place is being dealt with. So it kind of stops that feeling from coming back quite as strongly because there just isn't something there to mask. So if there's nothing there to mask or nothing to run from, then life is a lot easier just dealing with it as it comes and as it is.
I think we're at a really well-rounded state. So, we had started with talking about the difficulty of kind of starting this journey, and we didn't really define what recovery is for this person because we can't. But there, for me, in my opinion, I feel like if people are going to, the fellowships or the rooms or SMART or they're calling their friends, or if there's attempting any type of connection that gives them some relief and teaches them skills that they can use and teaches them something about themselves, just reflective even, in another person, then to me, that's a part of recovery and that's a part of that journey. And it's part of the reason why I think that if anyone is seeking out any of that, then they've already started their journey, even if they don't think that they want to stop. They've already started planting the seed of but could I?
Yeah.
And I think you did a really good job, because I didn't really talk much this time, but of outlining kind of your own journey and the thoughts you've had along the way, and the things that have been difficult, but the things also now that have made it a little easier. And I think, we can only give our own perspectives, but it'd be really interesting if people wanted to share theirs. We would love to hear from you. You can leave comments or, comment on our Facebook page or send us a message. But, yeah, I mean, what are the ways that you've experienced the difficulty of the journey and the fact that there's no easy out? I guess if I think about my own experience, then there's been these times when I've been doing something and I'm wow, I can't half-ass this. Even if I could, but if I did, I suddenly realized that I wouldn't be really changing anything, It's kind of I wish I could come up with an example really fast, but I don't have one on cue here. But I know that I've had that feeling, where I've been doing something to kind of change my direction or change a thought pattern or move myself into a different area of life. And I've listened to other people and what they did, and then I try it, and it's a lot harder to just even do than the fact that the task is hard. It's just hard to get off my ass or make the decision to actually do whatever the thing is to get the process even started. you know.
Right. Well, I think if I remember right, when you stopped eating gluten, then there were times that you stopped, right, and then there were still times that you were like working at a store that had cinnamon buns, and you're like, well, okay, fine, one is not going to kill me, and then you'd eat one, and then you'd be like, nope, this is not. I don't feel good. So it was a gradual process a little bit. It wasn't like super, it didn't take you years, but
That was really hard, actually. And I don't know, I know that is different for everyone, because if you get really sick, I think it's a little easier to stop because you don't feel like eating things that make you sick. But if you don't get sick immediately, and it's just like later on you feel the effects, kind of like drinking. Like in the moment you feel like good, and then later on you're like, oh crap.
yeah, the consequences are more immediate and more severe.
Yeah, so I mean, in that regard, I am absolutely like any other addict because it was really hard to stop. And I made so many excuses not to, and I thought if I just eat a little bit here and there, like maybe I can get away with it. Maybe I can be quote a normal person or whatever.
I'll be okay.
Yeah,
this is not gonna affect me in the long term.
I've heard the same thing said about people drinking alcohol, that are like, I love alcohol, I just have it here and there. But, if I have one, it usually leads to me having more. And that is absolutely what happens with me and bread. So, like, if I have one cookie, that might be okay for now, but eventually I'm going to want another one. And the next time I have a cookie, I'll probably have two. And if that went well and I didn't get sick enough, the next time I'll probably have three. And, like, I know that sounds crazy, and we're just talking about cookies, but this is the addictive process. It's like
It translates.
Those are the brain creating a pattern of behavior, and and you having to like go in and consciously break that pattern, and that's hard as heck.
It is. It's also uncomfortable, and there's something to the idea of not liking to feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But it's it's just part of the deal. It's just going to be uncomfortable for a little while, and that's okay because you will survive feeling uncomfortable. And while it may be uncomfortable, it's not a good excuse to not give things like a real shot. I think at the end of the day, anyone who gets into recovery actively works on themselves and, does certain things to take positive steps in their life will, reap the benefits, and you're never going to end up worse off than you are or were when you were using.
I think that's actually a really profound thing, because in a weird way, you can always end up worse off if you go the other direction, like just keep using. But
oh yeah, that can always get worse.
But if you head towards recovery, you are generally not ever worse off. Like, it doesn't mean that bad things don't happen, and they'll talk about that, all the time in the rooms. But like,
sure, and it doesn't mean that it's not tough, and it doesn't mean that you're going to turn into like a millionaire. Life is suddenly going to be easy, but it's the difficulties that come up when you're in recovery, or if you're like sober, are much more. There's answers. Like, it's much more manageable.
yeah.
The problems are things that you can deal with, and they're not going to be typically as severe as the problems that you're going to face while using or drinking.
And if you get good at it, then that's what I really love, is there's actually all of these new, we should do a podcast on this. We say that every time, but there's all these new recovery entrepreneurial like resources coming out, because basically there's this idea that you had all these skills when you were using to like score whatever you needed or get the resources, and now you can directly use those skills in business to get where you want to be. And like that's kind of
translates.
Yeah, that's kind of fascinating, that like you say, you might, but you might be a millionaire. You might like come up with, because you're clear-headed, you might come up with that idea that's like lightning and be able to act on the opportunity and like then suddenly use your skills to get all the resources you need. And, like,
yeah. And then,
it's
it's totally possible. Yeah, it's not guaranteed.
No,
I don't think that.
It's not guaranteed for quote normal people either. Like,
no, the only guarantee is that your life will get better.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the whole point.
Yeah. Well, even though there's no easy out, I still think it's totally worth it.
There's no easy out. It is definitely worth it. And I think even just giving, so the guy that I was talking about, who spoke last night, who kind of inspired this idea in me, said that one of the ways that he stayed sober was, telling himself that like, all right, I'll give it a year, and then I won't drink. I'll see how things go, and if it's not better, then I'll just go back to drinking. Or if I don't like it, or I don't know what he said to himself, but if you give it a long enough period of time and just kind of give it a trial shot and say, all right, let's see what happens, at least over, 3 months, 6 months, then at least it'll start to give you a little glimpse of how things could be. And they typically progressively get better the longer you stick with it. Yeah. It's definitely, for me, become a lot easier, also a lot better. And that kind of keeps giving me hope to keep going, that it will continue to get better. And that just, it's helpful every day to keep putting one foot in front of the other and going along with it.
I agree. Is that it for this podcast? What do you think?
I think we've covered a good amount of stuff.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks. The other 23 hours is used for entertainment, informational, and educational purposes only. We are not medical professionals. None of this information should be used to treat or diagnose any illnesses. We are not legal experts and do not offer legal advice. Please consult your local physician or lawyer for your own unique situation.
Don't make empty threats.
I guess we'll have to see how empty or full they get.
Are we still talking about cheese?
What?